After Kentucky's latest edition, there is no longer a debate. Mark Pope's club is the deepest team in college basketball.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Thursday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host for today's show, Andy Patton, and you are joining at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, throughout the offseason, Monday through Saturday in season, now that we've added the Locked On College Basketball Game Night show. I want to thank all of you for making this place your first listen or watch of the day, and remind you all that you can check out the show ad-free on Amazon Music. Also give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first bet of $5 or more wins. Lots to cover today. Mark Pope and Kentucky landed another four-star recruit, likely completing the deepest roster in college basketball, plus Chris Beard and Ole Miss bringing a McDonald's All-American to a reloaded Rebels roster. We'll get to that. And we're going to break down a pair of transfer portal additions for Big 12 schools to close out the show. But first, we start with Big Blue Nation and the Kentucky Wildcats. This is like the third time we've had the conversation about, is this Kentucky's final piece? Is their roster finally complete? Because they keep bringing in players. They keep making new additions. The latest being a four-star small forward in the 2025 recruiting class, Braydon Hawthorne, who committed to Kentucky after decommitting from West Virginia following Darian DeVries' move from West Virginia to Indiana this offseason. Hawthorne's a 6'8" small forward from Huntington, West Virginia. Again, he committed to West Virginia to play for Coach DeVries. DeVries left for the Indiana job, and Hawthorne decided to decommit. I was going to say enter the transfer portal. It's not the transfer portal. He planned to decommit from West Virginia and reopen his recruitment. And it was good timing for Hawthorne, not only, of course, deciding to decommit after a coaching change, which is pretty common, but Hawthorne was one of the fastest risers in the 2025 recruiting class. You can kind of tell some of the recruiting services maybe weren't quite as quick on updating their rankings. He's 33rd at 247 Sports in the 2025 class. He's still at 81st on ESPN, still at 63rd on On3. So there's a bit of a kind of variety on where Hawthorne should be, but he had an incredible season in Huntington. And for Kentucky, this is just such a kind of a fortuitous move for them. Of they planned to have the roster be pretty much complete. They're still pending the decision for Otega Owe in the NBA draft process. But then Travis Perry was kind of a last-minute addition into the transfer portal. He ends up heading to Ole Miss, who we'll talk about later in the show. But that gave Kentucky one more roster spot to play with. And even though they already have a fully complete rotation for next season, instead of filling this spot with like maybe a stash international guy or a walk-on type player, Kentucky goes out and gets a four-star recruit, because that's what Kentucky is able to do. That's what Mark Pope is able to do, not just because of the NIL funds. I'm sure that it helps. We won't pretend that it doesn't, but Mark Pope was the first coach to call Hawthorne when he decommitted from West Virginia. He remained actively engaged with Hawthorne throughout the recruiting process, as well as assistant coach Jason Hart, who's a high-level recruiter coming from USC, was consistently in contact with Hawthorne, who grew up a Kentucky fan and always wanted to go to Kentucky. So while he had attention from other high-profile programs, he visited Duke, he visited Pitt, he talked to Virginia Tech. He talked to West Virginia after Ross Hodge replaced Darian DeVries. And while he probably would have started at Pitt or started at Virginia Tech, if not played a significant role in his first year, he instead goes to Kentucky to play for Coach Pope. And I say play, he's not going to do a whole lot of that in his first year. This is an upside move for the staff. It's a player who's going to have great development, who has the upside to be a very, very good college basketball player in a year or two. And instead of opting for the quick opportunity to play big minutes at a Power 5 school, like he could have done with Pitt or VTech or some of these other programs, he opts to go to a place where he's going to be buried on the bench. And he acknowledged it in an ESPN article. He straight up said, like, I know I'm going to have to earn my playing time, and I'm willing to do that. Like, he understands the situation. I have a feeling that it's always good to feel wanted and appreciated. And Mark Pope calling him first and consistently staying in contact with him had to be, a big part of his decision. But I doubt they lied to him either. It sure sounds like they were pretty forthright with the fact that this is a pretty darn loaded roster already. You get it for Kentucky. I mean, we're talking about a kid who's 6'8" with a 7'3" wingspan. He can play the 3 or the 4. He's got serious upside, more upside than Travis Perry had. And I know that they liked Travis Perry because he was a Kentucky kid, but ultimately his decision to enter the portal in a super crowded backcourt makes a lot of sense. And for Mark Pope to be able to go bring in a kid like Hawthorne to replace him is just an indication of where this program is at right now in terms of their ability to acquire talent. Let's talk about that talent because, folks, this team is absolutely stacked top to bottom. Assuming Otega Owe returns, which is not a foregone conclusion, although it is the accepted belief around the Kentucky program, around the college basketball space. He has until May 28th, 1 week, a little less than a week to make that decision. But assuming he returns, they have 15 players on scholarship heading into next season. That is the max amount they are allowed to have, and it is loaded. 5 players in the front court. That's Brandon Garrison, their lone returner in the front court after a solid season coming off the bench last year. They also have incoming freshman Malachi Moreno, the 27th ranked player in the 2025 class, according to 247 Sports, as well as Andrija Jelavic from Croatia, a 6'11" big man joining the team from the international ranks. And then a pair of transfers in Jaden Quaintance from Arizona State, the big fish in this transfer portal class, an incredibly talented two-way big who will likely be a lottery pick, assuming he's healthy in the 2026 NBA draft. And then Reese Potter, 7'1" center from Miami, Ohio, who's a Lexington native. Not a particularly great player, but he's a 7'1" center who's your 5th big. That's a pretty darn good thing to have on the roster. 4 wings on this team. Braydon Hawthorne, we just talked about him, their newest recruit from the 2025 class. They also have Trent Noah returning to this roster after playing sparingly as a freshman last year. And then Mo Diabate, a 6'7" forward from Alabama, and Cam Williams, a 6'8" transfer forward from Tulane, both very, very talented players. And then 6 guards on this roster as well. Freshman Jasper Johnson, the 24th ranked player in the 2025 class, a pair of transfers in Jalen Lowe from Pitt, 6'3" point guard, and Denzel Aberdeen, a 6'5" combo guard from Florida. And then the 2 returners, of course, Owe, assuming he returns, and then Colin Chandler, who played sparingly as a backup guard last year. He followed the only player, I believe, who followed Mark Pope, or one of 2 players who followed Mark Pope from BYU, the other being Jackson Robinson. There are so many different ways this lineup could potentially play out for the Cats next year. I think Jaden Quaintance is pretty much locked into the starting center position. I'd be pretty surprised. Obviously, if Owe is back, he's starting. And I think Jalen Lowe is going to probably start at the 1. But then does Brandon Garrison start alongside Quaintance in the front court? Does Cam Williams play the 4? Or does Williams, the Tulane transfer, play the 3, which could allow, Garrison to start at the 4 and then Owe and Lowe? Or if Williams plays the 4, do you start Jasper Johnson as a true freshman? Does Aberdeen step into the starting lineup? We haven't even mentioned Diabate, who I think could compete for a starting spot. There's just an embarrassment of riches. And not even just who starts for this team, but who's the 8-9 man rotation? Because I'm looking at this group here, and some of these guys are going to be 12, 13, 14, 15 in the rotation. And that's crazy. It's crazy that somebody like Braydon Hawthorne or Trent Noah or maybe even Colin Chandler is going to play very, very little this upcoming season. There's just no way around it, obviously barring injuries or something like that. This team, unbelievably stacked. Now it's up to Coach Pope to figure out how to put all the pieces together, because there's a few returners, but most of these guys haven't played a lot of minutes together. So it's up to Coach to figure out what are the best combinations. Who is it that's going to step into a bigger role? Who's maybe going to be sidelined most of the year? And how does that lead to us winning this SEC and putting ourselves in a position to compete for a national championship? We'll get our first real good look at this team in an exhibition opener against Georgetown. This was recently announced by John Rothstein. Georgetown is going out to Lexington to play Kentucky in an exhibition game on October 30th. At the Rupp Arena. That should be a lot of fun to see how Ed Cooley's Georgetown team looks, but also to see what lineups Kentucky deploys as they get ready for the start of the upcoming season. Well, folks, Kentucky not the only SEC school with a big-time commitment this week, as a McDonald's All-American and Niko Bundalo will head to Oxford to play for Ole Miss. We'll talk about that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. I know you Kentucky fans are excited to watch the MVP, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They get picked up a Game 1 win in the Western Conference Finals over Minnesota. So whether it's a game-winning shot, whether it's a breakout player, there has never been a better time to get in on all the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. And if you're looking ahead to some futures odds for 2026, feeling good about Kentucky, they're at plus 2,000 right now to take home that 2026 national championship. We're about to talk about Ole Miss, a little bit tougher odds for Chris Beard and the Rebels at plus 10,000 right now, but maybe I'll be able to convince you with this next segment. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you will get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast, and we're still talking about freshmen committing to SEC schools. We talked about Braydon Hawthorne in the first segment, likely rounding out what looks to be an incredibly complete, stacked, very deep Kentucky roster heading into the 25-26 season. Now we're going to talk about another team that had some great success last year in the SEC in Chris Beard's Ole Miss Rebels, as they have landed a commitment from Niko Bundalo, a 6'10" lefty big man from Prolific Prep, a basketball high school in California. Bundalo was a McDonald's All-American this past year. He's a 4-star recruit in the 2025 class. The most recent update at 247 Sports had him 40th in the class. He was 30th at On3 and 34th at ESPN. So he's kind of consensus in that 30 to 40 range right now. And Bundalo actually initially committed to Washington in the recruiting process, but then decommitted about a month-ish ago, a little more than a month ago, from the Huskies. And then he took a visit to Ole Miss a few days ago and committed pretty much right after the visit. And interestingly, Bundalo had all sorts of attention out of high school. And when he first released his top 8, Washington wasn't on it. Neither was Ole Miss, by the way. It was like Bama was on there, Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, Ohio State was on there. I think UConn was on there. Michigan State, I believe, was on there as well. And then he announced his top 8, and then like a month later, he commits to Washington, not a school that was on that top list. And then he decommits before the season begins, still early in the process. And now he ends up at Ole Miss. So there's a lot kind of going on with Bundalo, but he's headed to the SEC. He's headed to play for Coach Chris Beard. And I think it fits a lot of what Coach Beard likes to do offensively and defensively. He's kind of an inside-out big man, and at 6'10", too, he's got the requisite size. If you got a power forward at 6'10", you're going to feel pretty good about that, especially in the SEC. He's a reliable three-point shooter, particularly out of the pick and roll and in catch-and-shoot stuff. He's not as great off the dribble, but again, I don't think Chris Beard is too concerned about, we can't recruit Niko Bundalo because he can't shoot threes off the dribble. You're not going to be asking him to do that. And if he is doing that, you're going to be having some conversations with him on the sideline. So I don't think that's ultimately too big of a concern for Bundalo. He's also just a really intense guy. If you watch the clips, you watch the videos of him, you read the scouting reports, he is just a menace. He's really hyper, really intense, always yelling at himself, talking a lot of crap. And it's kind of a good and a bad thing. A lot of the scouting reports have mentioned his kind of on-court attitude and persona as being potentially detrimental, more so in the sense that he can compound mistakes and kind of get in his own head a little bit. He's also young. I mean, we're talking about 18-year-old guys. Like, this is a pretty common thing. And I think Chris Beard probably likes this about him. Like, this is probably not something that Coach Beard is viewing as detrimental. I think he wants that fire. I think he wants that, just like that energy, that enthusiasm, the gung-ho kind of nasty attitude that Bundalo kind of displayed at times in high school. And I think that if they can hone it in, I think this could really, really work because the talent is there. Anybody who's 6'10", who can space the floor, who can score around the rim, like that's a valuable archetype for so many reasons. And I think that this is a really quality fit. And the fourth freshman addition for Coach Chris Beard, and a group that I think is going to be pretty solid. I don't think there's a ton of, I think Bundalo's the most notable day one contributor out of this freshman class for Coach Beard. The other ones being Tylis Jordan and Patton Pinkins. Tylis Jordan is a 6'9" forward who's 74th in the 2024 recruiting class. And then Patton Pinkins is 6'5" two guard who's 89th. They also have a French guard coming in from the international ranks, Elias Camardine. I do not know a ton about Elias Camardine, so I don't know how much playing time he's necessarily going to command right away. But I would expect that this group, I mean, we're talking about a Chris Beard team last year that was basically all seniors. And so they have a ton of holes to fill. They lost 5 of their 6 leading scorers from last year's team. Literally every single one of those guys who departed left because of eligibility. The only player who returned, who was among their 6 leading scorers, was Malik Dia, who's going to be a senior next year. I should say 6 leading scorers, quite notably, we talked about this a lot on the show. Chris Beard's team had 6 players in double figures last year, which is unheard of at the college basketball level. So all of those double-digit scorers are gone with the exception of Malik Dia. The rest of them all moved on because of eligibility. That would be Padula, Brakefield, Gray Davis, Matthew Morrell, Jalen Murray, all out the door. So there's a lot of holes to fill. But Chris Beard's not going to play a ton of freshmen to fill those holes. That's not what he's ever really done. Again, I do think Bundalo gets some playing time next year, but I also, you look at this transfer portal class and you see a bunch of guys who are going to contribute right away. How it all fits together is something I'm a bit intrigued by, let's put it that way. But the 5-man transfer portal class so far for Chris Beard and the Rebels, a lot of talent. AJ Storr, chief among them, coming over from Kansas, his 8th school in 8 years after going to 4 different high schools and then playing at St. John's as a freshman. Wisconsin as a sophomore, where he scored 16 points a game and was one of the best players in the Big Ten. And then last year at Kansas, where he completely plummeted, only 6 points, shot under 30% from 3. Now he gets a chance for another reset in the SEC. He's been in the Big East, the Big Ten, the Big 12. Now he's joining the SEC. Just collecting them all for AJ Storr here. We'll see if he can kind of right the ship. They also got James Scott and Corin Johnson, both coming over from Louisville. Scott's a big man, 7-foot center, averaged 7 points, 6 boards, shot 78% on 2s last year. Corin Johnson only played 2 games at Louisville, but prior to that was at the University of Washington, where he averaged 11 points on 37% shooting. They also have forward Corey Chest from LSU, who averaged 6 points and 6.5 rebounds as a freshman last year for the Tigers. And then another freshman from the SEC, one we've already talked about today, Travis Perry, who averaged about 2.5 points on 32% three-point shooting as a freshman for the Wildcats last year. So 5 transfers coming in, 4 freshmen coming in, among them the McDonald's All-American and Bundalo. And I'm very intrigued by how all these pieces are going to fit together for Coach Chris Beard. My initial concern looking at this roster is, well, do they have like a go-to guy? But then I'm not sure they need one. Because again, last year they had 6 players in double figures. So I think if you didn't watch any of them last year, you'd probably think, oh, they didn't really have a go-to guy. Well, they did. Sean Padula was their go-to guy. I don't think there's really any debate about that. He was their best offensive player. He had the ball in his hands a lot. He was the guy that they went to when they needed a bucket, but he was not so score first mentality wise that they couldn't have, other players break through and have big games and ultimately finish the season with 6 guys averaging double figures. But they did have a go-to guy in Sean Padula. And I think that is the question with this roster, because it can't be AJ Storr maybe it can. He was at Wisconsin, but that's a big risk to assume he can take on that role after struggling so much last year. Is it just Malik Dia, the senior returner? I think that's probably the easy way to go. But he didn't necessarily look like a guy ready to be the leading scorer on a team that's in the hopes of being a top 5, top 8 finisher in the SEC and a single-digit seed like they were last year. Maybe he can step into that role. You have other really talented pieces around him. Again, I think a front court with James Scott and Bundalo and Corey Chest is going to have a lot of success in the SEC. I think you got some really talented guards, obviously Storr among them. But I'm intrigued by how all these pieces are necessarily going to fit together for Coach Beard, but I do trust the process. I think there's a lot of intrigue and upside with this specific group of players, but we'll see what he's able to do. He's a coach who he's entering his third year at Ole Miss. Has been a wildly successful coach throughout his entire career. Obviously, he was at Texas, had a ton of success there, got let go because of off-the-court stuff, ends up at Ole Miss. They went 20-12 in his first year, missed the NCAA tournament, but year two was last year. They went 24-12, 10-8 in the SEC, which was good for sixth. They beat Arkansas in the SEC tournament before losing to Auburn. They earned a 6th seed. And they pulled an upset in the NCAA tournament as well, not only beating play-in 11 seed North Carolina, but then they upset 3-seeded Iowa State and then lost very close game to Michigan State. 73-70 was the final score against the 2-seeded Spartans. Nearly pulled off a run to the Elite Eight. Very excited to see what Chris Beard's team looks like in his third year, especially now with this addition of a McDonald's All-American in Niko Bundalo. Well, we've talked SEC for the first two segments. We're going to close out the show talking about the Big 12, a pair of transfer portal additions, starting with Devin Cambridge, who's about to embark on his 7th college basketball season and his 3rd different Big 12 school. We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Talking transfer portal now after talking about a pair of freshman additions for SEC schools at Kentucky and Ole Miss. Now we're going to talk about some Big 12 players some transfers going to the Big 12. We'll start with Devan Cambridge. Devin Cambridge committed to Central Florida. Johnny Dawkins and the Knights for what will be his 7th season of college basketball. If you're thinking, man, I've heard that name, Devan Cambridge, you might be thinking of him back in his Auburn days, way back pre-COVID when he started his college basketball career at Auburn. He ended up spending 3 years with the Tigers, transferred to Arizona State for a year, and then spent the last 2 years at Texas Tech. However, he only played 14 total games at Texas Tech, 8 in his first year with the Red Raiders, 6 in the second year. So those 2 years were both wiped out by medical redshirts. And then one of his 3 seasons at Auburn was during the COVID season, which does not count against his eligibility. So effectively, the NCAA sees 2 full seasons at Auburn that count against his eligibility, 1 full season at Arizona State that counts against his eligibility, and then now this upcoming season at Central Florida, assuming he is healthy and plays a full season, will be his 4th and final season. They're allowing him to play 4 seasons across 7 years. Again, worth reiterating, we go back to the conversation Isaac and I had on Monday, why they are not letting Ali Khalifa, who has played 3 seasons in 4 college basketball, or in 4 years, they are not giving him an extra year because they say his 5-year clock has closed. It's just inconsistent. I don't mind that Devin Cambridge has more eligibility, to be clear. I think Ali Khalifa also should have more eligibility. And a good example, Khalifa's, I think, played 91 college basketball games. Devin Cambridge has played 141 college basketball games and was granted another year of eligibility. It just doesn't make sense. The inconsistency from the NCAA is absolutely brutal. Moving on. Devin Cambridge, career 7 points per game, about 4 rebounds. He's always been an efficient scorer, not a great 3-point shooter. In fact, under 30% for his career. Also not a great free throw shooter in his career, but he has been an effective 2-point scorer throughout his career, has started 78 games, so he's got a ton of experience. He's spent a lot of time in the Big 12, 1 year at Arizona State, the last 2 years at Texas Tech, so he is comfortable with this conference. He is comfortable with the opponents, and he joins a very new-look roster for Johnny Dawkins and Central Florida. They lost their 4 leading scorers, Darius Johnson and Jordan Ivy Curry, both to eligibility. Keyshawn Hall transferred to Auburn, and Mustafa Thiam transferred to Cincinnati. They've added 10 transfers. 10 different players have joined this team from the transfer portal. If you watched Central Florida last year, if you're a fan, if you're a casual fan, you're not going to see pretty much any familiar faces on this roster. But you are going to see 6 high major players who transferred to Central Florida, including Riley Kugel from Mississippi State, who was previously at Florida, briefly committed to Kansas last year. They also land Jordan Burks from Georgetown, who was previously at Duke. They land Cambridge. We already talked about him, of course. Jeremy Fomina from Mississippi State, John Bull from Ole Miss, and Chris Parker from Villanova, who was also previously at Alabama. They also have some other transfers coming in as well, but wow, it's going to be a fully new team for Johnny Dawkins in Central Florida. I'm interested to see how Cambridge looks, see if he can hopefully get a healthy year here and round out his college career with yet another stop in the Big 12. Last but not least, another Big 12 edition to talk about here to close out the show. Kansas State, Jerome Tang and the Wildcats land a transfer from Bowling Green, Marcus Johnson. Marcus Johnson's a 6'7", 265-pound monster. He played high school basketball at LeBron's High School, St. Vincent St. Mary's in Akron, Ohio. He played for the Falcons last year. He was previously at the non-D1 level, so last year was his first year of D1 basketball, and he was excellent. He played for Bowling Green in the MAC, averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists for the Falcons, was an incredible shooter, 39.4% from three, as a 6'7" big man to shoot that well from beyond the arc. This was also on 6 3-point attempts per game. This dude is an absolute shot chucker. Look at the box scores, watch the tape. The man has the basketball in his hands. He's looking to get rid of it as soon as he can possibly can. And he's not throwing it to teammates. He is throwing this thing towards the net every single time he gets the ball. Also a very effective free throw shooter, 89.8% last year on nearly 3 attempts per game. He hung 23 points on Michigan State in a game where he shot 1 of 11 from 3. To score 23 points in a game where you shoot 1 of 11 from 3 is something else entirely. He was 8 of 13 on his 2-point attempts, and you watch the film of this. He's shooting crazy one-legged step-back mid-range jumpers with defenders right in his face, and he's just cashing them. It was a fun watch. He kind of went semi-viral during this game because it was a road game at East Lansing, and the fans were like, what in the heck is going on with this big dude drilling shots all over us in that one? If he'd shot even decently from 35, pretty much fully rebuilt in the Big 12 in Kansas State. It's been a pretty quiet portal class so far, only 3 additions outside of Marcus Johnson. One of them, Nate Johnson, also a player named Johnson, also from Akron, interestingly, transferring from the University of Akron. Johnson averaged 14 points, 3.5 assists per game last year. Kamari McGriff comes over from UNC Wilmington. He averaged 11.5 points, shot 65% from the field. And then Abdi Bashir from Monmouth, he averaged 20 points per game last year, 38% from 3 as a 6'7" guard. Really excited to see how Bashir looks playing at the high major level. But this Kansas State team is reportedly not done. And in fact, the latest indication is that Kansas State is now heavily involved and potentially the front runner to land Memphis transfer PJ Haggerty. He was a second-team All-American last year. Haggerty is still in the draft process, has not removed his name from the NBA draft, but after going through the combine, he is starting to look at colleges, presumably weighing his options versus what scouts and team general managers are telling him in the workout process versus what college general managers and college coaches are offering him in the portal to figure out what decision he wants to make. The reports are that Kansas State has the most competitive offer financially, might be able to top NC State and Will Wade, who is right now one of the other frontrunners to land Haggerty. So it'll be interesting to see. Honestly, Haggerty's a great fit for Jerome Tang. Like, this is the kind of the diminutive guards who are score first, like love to have the ball in their hands type guards have worked really well for Kansas State. And Doug McDaniel was up and down. He had some off the court issues, but Tyler Perry was great for them, the transfer from North Texas. Of course, Marquise Noel before that was excellent. Kind of what put Jerome Tang on the map was his performance with that team. So somebody like PJ Haggerty would be immediately awesome at Kansas State, and I think would vault this Jerome Tang team to the top 5, maybe top 6, top 8 in the Big 12. It's going to be tough with BYU being so improved going into next year as well. But right now, as it stands without PJ Haggerty, I'm not super sold on this Kansas State team. I do like this Marcus Johnson addition, but it's not enough to move the needle dramatically in a conference that has Kansas and Arizona and Houston and Iowa State and BYU and Baylor and everybody else. But PJ Haggerty, that certainly would move the needle. So we're keeping a close eye on that. Either NC State or Kansas State would immediately become contenders in the Big 12 and ACC respectively if they were able to bring in the All-American Haggerty. So we'll keep our close eye on that. And Darion Williams, for that matter, who's also being pursued by NC State, as well as Kansas being the other school in on Darion Williams at this point. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball podcast, folks. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Also, a special shout out to those everydayers. We appreciate you. And those of you watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. Get notified every time there is a new episode coming out. Isaac and I will be back with you all on Friday to get you through the final days before the long Memorial Day weekend. We'll be back with you all on Monday as well. Thanks again, folks, for listening. Have a fantastic rest of your day. We always want to say apologies to the lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes, especially today. Cheers to the McBruins. And until next time, peace out.